Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out here today. Secretary Pompeo sent my team up here today to work with our Permanent Rep, Ambassador Kraft, and the UN in the Security Council meeting this afternoon on Syria, first and foremost, to give credit to the United Nations for the significant step forward on Syria that the launching of the Constitutional Committee at the end of October in Geneva represents. I met with UN Special Envoy Geir Pedersen earlier today. We consider him the architect of this. It's an extraordinary diplomatic achievement that we want to honor at the same, and as well as having other contacts up here. But at the same time, the U.S. wants to work with the United Nations to move this political process forward. We have an opportunity with this first step to execute UN Resolution 2254, which is now next month 4 years old, with very little progress until this launch. The reason this is important is that the situation in Syria continues to be of great concern to all of us. We believe that after the Turkish incursion in October, we, working with others, have helped stabilize the situation. We're continuing the fight against Daesh, ISIS in the northeast. We're working with our partners. We're working with all of the other actors up there to keep that region stable. But looking at the rest of Syria, we're very concerned. You saw what happened in Idlib yesterday when the Syrian regime launched a long-range very large missile, an SS-21 missile, normally used in the Cold War for nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction launchers, against, of all things, a internally displaced persons camp in Al-Qa and a hospital with 12 dead, many scores wounded. This is the kind of thing we see again and again, and it has to stop. We're very worried about Idlib. We need a nationwide ceasefire. It needs to start in Idlib. By the same token, we're seeing, again, facilitated by the Assad regime, and at least with a blind eye from the Russians, the Iranians introducing further long-range weapon systems into the theater of operations, mainly Syria, threatening, first of all, Israel, but our other partners and allies from Saudi Arabia and Jordan to Iraq. You've seen the whole series of strikes and counteractions this week. Let me be clear. The United States supports Israel's right to self-defense, and that includes supporting Israel's acting in its self-defense. We've made this clear to everybody, including the Russians, and through them we believe it's been passed on to the Syrians. So this is a situation that remains extremely volatile, extremely delicate. It needs full UN engagement. That's what we hope to see move forward this afternoon in the Security Council. Thank you very much.
James Bays.
James Bays from Al Jazeera. Perhaps you could explain further to us the President's stated strategy of seizing the oil, and do you have any doubt that that is perhaps not legal under international law?
I have every belief, though I'm not a lawyer, that that is legal, because it's not a question per se of America doing one thing. The mission to the military is to remain on, to work with the SDF, to ensure that the SDF, our partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces, is a viable player in the fight against ISIS and the maintaining of security. That requires, as in the past, because this has been going on for some 4 years since the SDF took control of those oil fields, maintaining control of the oil fields, first of all, to keep them out of the hands of ISIS. That's the most important thing for the U.S. Secondly, to keep them out of the hands of other nefarious actors, of which there are a number in Syria. We're doing nothing illegal. The SDF is continuing to work in those oil fields as in the past. We will facilitate that work as part of our overall strategy towards Syria.
Fox News. Mr. Ambassador, a recent Pentagon report said that the U.S. drawdown in the Turkish incursion into Syria has aided ISIS in its return. What do you say about that? And also, what about the plight of the Christians and the Kurds in that same region?
I would say that that is not the Pentagon. That is the independent Inspector General of the U.S. command out there, the Combined Joint Task Force. Operation Inherent inherent resolves. Inspector Generals can say whatever they want. I've complained about some of the things I said in the past. I would challenge some of that as well. In terms of the minorities, first of all, President Trump last month signed a $50 million stabilization program to come on top of the other stabilization funds that we have contributed in the past in Syria, and very importantly, our coalition partners, particularly the Germans, Saudis, and the Emiratis, have contributed for the population. That $50 million goes to minority, ethnic, and religious minorities in the Northeast. We are very concerned about them. We're working with the Turks on minorities, Kurdish and Christian, in the areas where they're operating, and this will remain a priority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. On the withdrawal of American forces from the Northeast, in abandoning Kurdish allies, what message do you think that this sends to American allies elsewhere? And what impact do you think that this has had on the current situation in that area?
Well, remember, we're not abandoning anybody. We're remaining on in the Northeast. We didn't support or greenlight or do anything else other than to respond very, very actively to the Turkish incursion, which we had told the Turks before, A, we would not support in any way, and B, we would act against. That acting against was not in military terms, they're a NATO ally, but rather by using crushing sanctions and a diplomatic offensive that within a week brought the Turkish incursion to a ceasefire where more or less the Turks have remained. So I wouldn't say that we have been inactive, I wouldn't say we have withdrawn. Obviously, we believe, not just in northeast Syria, but around the world, that American commitments, be they military, be they diplomatic, be they economic and financial, are important. We're maintaining our commitments to the people of northeast Syria. We're maintaining our commitments to the goals of 2254 and of the fight against Daesh, as the coalition, which is now some 82 nations, or at least a small group, which was almost 35 of those nations, agreed in a ministerial meeting in Washington last Thursday.
This is the last question. Margaret Bashir. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret Bashir, Voice of America. Could you just clarify on the oil again for a moment, please? The U.S., if it seizes the oil, what are you going to do with any revenue from the oil? Is it something you're going to hold to return to the Syrian people? What is your intention overall in the long term towards these oil fields, other than the short-term goal of keeping them out of ISIS's hands?
The oil belongs in the Syrian constitution to the Syrian people. Elements of the Syrian people are now exploiting those oil fields, gaining revenue from those oil fields. We think it's important that that continues unchallenged by Daesh or other actors. That's what we're doing in the Northeast as concerns that particular economic asset. Thank you very much.